Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Carrie Pruden and I am the Professional Practice Standards and Ethics Consultant here at the SALPN. This webinar was created to assist LPNs to better understand what the CEP program is, why it was developed, and how to report your CEP hours. The Continuing Education Portfolio Program was created as a formalized way for the SALPN to hold LPNs accountable for the lifelong learning that is required in our careers. For a nurse to remain competent throughout their career, ongoing education is not just good to have, but it is essential. Healthcare is ever evolving, and LPNs need to expand their knowledge to be able to practice safely and effectively. LPNs are required to meet the standards of practice and the code of ethics every day of their professional career. Continuing education is a mandatory requirement for annual licensure as per the SALPN regulatory bylaws. CEP hours are to be accumulated annually to improve or maintain knowledge, skills, and practice competencies through continuing education. LPNs will utilize the program to self-reflect upon their individual practice and are encouraged to seek annual education, assisting them to ensure safe, competent practice. The Continuing Education Portfolio Program assists LPNs in meeting these standards and the Code of Ethics. One of the principles that was used when developing the standards of practice is LPN standards encourage leadership through self-awareness and reflection, commitment to individual and professional growth, and promotion of the best possible service to the public. Standard number 1, licensed practical nurses are accountable for their practice and responsible for ensuring that their practice and conduct both meet the standards of the profession and legislative requirements. One of the indicators applicable in this standard would be to engage in ongoing assessment of their professional practice and competence and seek opportunities for continuous learning. Standard number 2, licensed practical nurses possess knowledge obtained through practical nurse preparation and continuous learning relevant to their professional LPN practice. There are several indicators that will help you to know that you are meeting your standard and can prove that you're meeting your standards of practice by participating in the CEP program. These indicators include possess current knowledge, access and use relevant and credible information technology and other resources, review and integrate relevant nursing research findings, maintain awareness of current trends and issues in healthcare and society. Evolve your own LPN practice in response to changes and new developments affecting the profession. The Code of Ethics requirements are much the same. Within principle number 2, licensed practical nurses provide safe and competent care for their clients. One of the indicators says you must apply new knowledge, technology, and scientific advances to promote safety, client satisfaction, and well-being. Principle number 5, licensed practical nurses recognize and function within their personal and professional competence and values system. You would then be able to indicate this by engaging in opportunities for career-long learning to continuously develop the competencies required to meet ethical and regulatory requirements. Because you must meet the standards of practice in the Code of Ethics, it is a requirement that an LPN engages in continuous education throughout their career. So how many hours do you need within this program? The number of hours required for continuing education is based upon how long a practicing license was held during the previous year. This is not to be confused with how many months an LPN was employed in the previous licensure year, nor is it related to how many hours you actually worked. An LPN returning to practicing status, such as changing from non-practicing to practicing, or the initiation of a license mid-year, which would be a student graduate or an out-of-province applicant, for example, are required to obtain CEP hours according to the prorated schedule as you see on the screen. An example would be if an LPN held practicing status for the full year, 24 hours of CEP hours would be required. Within this 24-hour requirement, at least 8 hours must come from the formal activity section. All 24 hours could be from this category, but you must have a minimum of 8 hours formal activity section. Another example would be an LPN that held practicing status for 6.5 months. They would only require 12 CEP hours according to this chart. That LPN would be required to have at least 4 hours from the formal activity section, with remaining 8 hours coming from either category, formal or informal, or a combination of the two. How do you decide what is a formal activity and what is an informal activity? One of the easiest ways is to use the CEP placement tool. This chart will guide you in placing your education into the formal or informal category. It is available on the SALPN website and is always included in emails related to the CEP program renewal. To use this, think about the educational activity that you are reporting and follow the questions until you get to the bottom of the chart. The questions and the answers that you provide will lead you down this flow chart and land you at either formal activity or informal activity. So what are formal activities? Educational activities related to nursing or healthcare to be considered formal activity must include 2 or more of the following criteria. Ends with an exam or a quiz. Includes assignments, presentations, learning packages, or projects. This is often how many workplace learnings are done. You're required to read your learning package or work through your learning package, or required to listen to a presentation. Another criteria would be demonstration of competence or a competency. This could be a return demonstration back to your educator after you have completed your learning package or listened to the presentation. Interactive group work falls as one of the criteria, as does receiving a credential. A credential looks like a diploma, a certification of a specialized area of practice. A credential is not just the receiving of a certificate. There is one other criteria listed, pass or fail. If you choose either the pass-fail option or the exam quiz option or both, please also choose one of the other learning methods to demonstrate how you achieved the learning. As you notice, this criteria matches what was in the CEP placement chart from the previous slide. So what about informal activities? What are they? Again, you would use the CEP placement tool. It will help guide you for formal or informal and use it for every activity. Some activities are easily defined as informal, and they include recertifications in several of these listed topics here: CPR, TLR, WMIS, PART, GPA, WAVE. Recertifications in those are automatically informal. Preceptorship, 8 hours per week is able to be reported for precepting. Nursing or healthcare committees are informal activities. These could include occupational health and safety committees, nursing policy committees. It does not, however, include work performed on behalf of a union. Any other educational activity related to nursing or healthcare that does not meet the criteria for a formal activity would be reportable for an informal activity. Just remember that it must be nursing or healthcare related. This placement tool can be your best friend in categorizing your CEP hours. Consider bookmarking it or even printing it out. One of the most common questions about the CEP program are about CEP carryover hours. Do I have carryover hours? Where can I find them? How do I carry them over? Before we talk specifically about carryover hours, let's make sure you can get logged into your member portal. To access your member portal, you will go to the SALPN website and click on Member Portal from the main page. Your login information is your email that SALPN has on file for you, along with your self-determined password. If you have forgotten your password, follow the directions on the website. Once you are logged into your portal, you will be asked to provide a code to verify who you are. Due to the need to better protect your member information, the SALPN has recently required an additional layer of security when logging in. A two-factor authentication process is being used. Once you have signed in with your email address and password, there will be another screen such as what you see on your screen right now that will advise you a code is being sent to your email. Use this code to enter in the boxes indicated and then click Validate. If you do not receive a code, please check your spam or your junk folder for an email from noreply@salpn.com. Once you are logged into your portal, there are several things that you can do. This is where you will update your personal information and view invoices related to renewal, for fines, or information about your independent practice. Creating a CEP record for this year is step one in determining if you have any CEP hours available for carryover. So remember, log into your portal, and then we will look at creating a CEP record for this current year. On the left side of the portal, there are currently 7 tabs. Click on My CEP, and that will take you to this box. You need to have a record for this current year before you can access your carryover hours or add CEP hours for this year. If you do not have a 2020 record, please create one by clicking on the plus sign in the upper right corner. After you've clicked on the plus sign, you will see the current registration year. Click Save. Now you can work in your current year's record. We will start with reviewing how to assign and we will start with reviewing how to view and assign carryover hours from last year to this year. If you reported more than the minimum 24 hours from last year, you have the option to carry over hours to be applied to the current year's total. The maximum number of hours that can be carried over in any year is 8. No matter how many hours in excess you had, the maximum that can be carried over is 8. You are able to apply the hours from last year into this year in the category in which you reported them last year. In the formal activity hours section, you will see the number of hours you can carry over in this section. In the total hours section, you will see the total number of carryover hours. This can include both formal and informal activities. There is no informal activity section listed here. To determine the number of informal hours you have available to carry over, you use the total hours minus the formal hours, and that will give you the number of informal activity hours available for carryover. A couple of examples of this. This picture on your screen shows that this person has 8 hours of carryover in the informal activity section only. This was determined by taking the total number of hours listed as 8 minus the formal hours allowed for carryover, which is 0, and that results with 8 hours for the informal activity section. This other example shows an LPN who has 8 hours of carryover allowed for this year. It is easily determined how many hours are in the formal activity section. That is marked as 4 hours. To determine the informal hours, you would take 8 hours from the total allowed minus 4 hours of formal carryover, and that will leave 4 hours that you can apply in the informal activity section. You may begin entering in your allowed number of carryovers in this area. There will be white boxes, and that is where you will assign your carryover hours. Remember, it is not mandatory to carry over hours. When a box is shaded gray, it means you do not have carryover hours to use in that section. When you have completed choosing the carryover hours, make sure you check the box that says you agree. Keep in mind that carryover hours that you have chosen will require supporting documentation if you are chosen for a licensure audit. If you already uploaded the documentation, it is in our database. If not, please keep your records in an easily accessible place. After you have assigned your carryover hours, if you decide to, or if you are able to, or if you choose not to use any of your carryover hours, you can begin adding your 2020 CEP information. Click Add to open a new section where you can enter one CEP activity. Once you click Add, the first box that comes up will show as completed. This is a reminder that you are only to report CEP hours that have been completed. For this example, we will use the formal activity section. Under the CEP section, there is a drop-down menu that allows you to choose formal or informal activity. When I chose formal activity, a new box appears beside that's called the activity type box. Within here, you will almost always choose nursing healthcare education. The professional growth plan option is for those LPNs that have completed the extensive plan that incorporates several months of work based on goals and assessments. You would click in the little circle beside nursing healthcare education and have it turn blue. For the name of the CEP activity, use things such as Employer Education Day, IV Push Certification, Sask Polytech Community Nursing Course, however the education is identified. The completion date is the date that you took or that you completed the education. Double check that it matches any documentation that you may have been provided with. In the hours box, this is where you will report the number of hours that you spent on the educational activity. If it is a course that lists credit hours, such as nursing classes from Saskatchewan Polytechnic or a university, 1 credit hour is generally equal to 3 CEP hours. Next, we get to the area where you will choose from the formal activity criteria. Remember that CEP placement chart? This section follows that same criteria. As I mentioned earlier, if you use exam quiz and/or pass-fail, please indicate the learning method by choosing one other option. The last box is the summary of learning. In this area, you are expected to briefly summarize what you have learned from this reported learning activity. Comments that only contain the type of education or the name of the class or of the webinar are not sufficient. Informal activities are added in much the same way. You would first use the CEP section drop-down to choose an informal activity. The activity box opens a little differently, but it has a drop-down section where there are several options to choose from. You will choose either one that is listed, or you would use other if the activity that you have completed is not on the list. For this activity, I have chosen preceptorship. So you would enter the name of the activity, precepted a practical nursing student, for example. The completion date will be the date of your last shift where you precepted the nursing student. For the number of hours to report, you are allowed to report 8 hours per week that you precepted this nursing student. In the summary of learning section for precepting, please include the specific weeks that this activity occurred. For example, you could write, I precepted the nursing student during the following weeks: May 3rd to 9th, May 10th to 16th, May 31st to June 2nd. By including the actual weeks that you precepted the nursing student, this will help support the 8 hours per week that you are reporting. What do you do if you need to delete an activity? Well, it's as simple as going into your CEP portal. You click on the activity status box within the CEP record of that activity. You will get a drop-down menu that has completed and canceled as options. Choose canceled, and your activity should disappear. This Save for Later button is one of the most important pieces when you're adding or changing your CEP hours information. Always use the Save for Later button because the system will not automatically save anything for you. Also, the Submit button is only to be used when you are completing your renewal. By using Save for Later, you will ensure that any information that you enter is retained in the system. You are able to go into your portal at any time during the year to add CEP activities or make modifications to previous entries. If you have accidentally used the Submit button, don't worry. There's an Edit button at the bottom of your CEP page that, when used, opens up your CEP record once again. If you're ever having trouble and it looks like you cannot make additions or changes to your information, scroll down to the bottom of the page and look for the Edit button. Your CEP record is always able to be modified until you submit your renewal. I get asked a lot about what documentation is needed for CEP hours. Well, the short answer is, for renewal, it is only mandatory to include documentation if you are submitting a professional growth plan or if you have been requested to do so by the registrar. You have the option to upload the documentation that supports your reported CEP hours as you're entering in your CEP information or any time prior to renewal. Or you can keep the information on your own computer, or you can keep paper copies. When you will be required to upload the documents is when you are selected for audit. The CEP audit is done to verify what you have reported for your CEP hours and that these hours meet the regulatory requirements that we discussed earlier. You should always keep your own records for the reported activities for 3 years. So when we do request your documentation, what are we looking for? We are looking for verification that you completed or attended the activity that you reported during renewal, and we are looking to make sure they meet the requirements of the CEP program in that your reported hours are nursing or healthcare related. For formal activity hours, the documentation can include a course transcript, a signed letter from your employer or your educator, a certificate of completion. Keep in mind, this is not the same as a certificate of attendance. A signed copy of an agenda from an education day is acceptable. A picture of your online employer-based training record, such as the training registration system that is used in many SHA facilities. It is acceptable so long as you highlight the activity that matches the reported activity. Really, anything that will confirm that you were there and that you completed the education is acceptable. What is not acceptable, because it does not provide enough information, are things such as receipt for payment of a registration fee, a poster that is advertising an event, unsigned documents or agendas. Remember, this is for the formal activity section. If you do not have any of the preferred pieces of documentation, please contact me before you submit your CEP hours during renewal. It is much easier to discuss and see what alternative arrangements can be made before you renew, rather than when you are audited. For informal activities, the requirements for documentation are less rigid due to the different types of educational activities that fall in this category. Acceptable means of documentation include a picture taken during a webinar with a link to the original source, a picture taken during a video that you are watching, again with a link to the source, a PDF of an article or a journal that you have read, either with a link to the source or the document attached. When you are including a link, you can include the link in the summary of learning box along with your description of your learning. For preceptorship, a signed letter from the school where the student attended that includes the weeks that the precepting took place. You can use a copy of a recertification card, such as ones that you receive for TLR or CPR. Verification of attendance at committee meetings. A reminder that these meetings must relate to nursing or healthcare. You could include the front page of the minutes that shows your attendance, or you could obtain a signed letter from the chair of the committee with the dates and times you were at the meetings. Really, it's similar to the formal activity in that we need you to confirm for us that you viewed or that you read or that you attended the CEP activity that you reported. This brings us to the end of the webinar. If you have more questions about the CEP program, please review the resources on the SALPN website in the Continuing Education Portfolio section. If you don't find the answer to your questions in the online materials, please contact me at practice@salpn.com. When you email, don't forget to include your name and licensure number along with your specific questions. If you lose this email address, please use the website form that says Ask a Practice Standards or Ethics question. It is on the Members section page. Thank you very much for watching this webinar.